When it seems like God is silent and you're going through tough times, remember, pruning is the pathway to a great harvest. This process can be painful, but it is necessary for spiritual growth and preparation for greater things. The pruning process is one of the most significant and often painful stages of spiritual growth. This is a time when God meticulously removes all the dead and unnecessary things from our lives to allow us to flourish and develop. This process involves cutting off old exhausted relationships, distancing ourselves from toxic friendships, reevaluating outdated views and habits, and changing ways of existence that no longer serve our spiritual purpose. The importance of this stage cannot be overstated. Often, we cling to the past, to the familiar and comfortable, even if it no longer benefits us. Pruning helps us to free ourselves from these dead branches, allowing new life and energy to enter our existence. The process can be painful and difficult, but it is absolutely essential for spiritual renewal and growth. Believers go through tough seasons and moments in their lives. These are times when it seems that everything is going wrong, when we face losses, disappointments, and painful changes. But it is in these moments that the deepest work of God occurs in our souls. As preacher John Maxwell once said, God never promised us an easy life, but He promised strength to overcome difficulties. These words perfectly reflect the essence of the pruning process. It is important to understand that pruning is not a punishment. It is an act of love and care aimed at our benefit. God, as a skilled gardener, knows which branches need to be removed so that the tree can bear fruit fully. This process requires trust and faith that God knows what He is doing. He sees further than we do and knows what we need to achieve our true spiritual potential. Going through pruning, we learn to let go of the past and embrace new opportunities. We become more receptive to the divine will, our hearts are purified, and our spirit is strengthened. This is a path to renewal that leads us to deep inner transformation and prepares us for the great deeds that God has destined for us. The pruning process is an opportunity to reassess our lives, discard all that is superfluous and unnecessary, and open ourselves to new blessings and opportunities. It is a difficult but necessary path to spiritual awakening and maturity. When God's values begin to take the primary place in your life, pushing worldly pursuits to the background, this is a clear sign that you are in the pruning process. This shift in priorities signals that God's influence is penetrating deeper into your heart and mind. This process may be subtle and gradual, but its results are inevitable and transformative. A change in priorities manifests in your daily choices and behavior. What once seemed important and necessary loses its significance. You may find that previous hobbies and goals no longer bring satisfaction, and instead you seek deeper spiritual connection and service. For example, rather than spending time seeking worldly pleasures, you start looking for ways to serve others, strengthening your faith through prayer and reading the scriptures. This shift from the earthly to the divine is evidence that God is actively working in your life, preparing you for greater things. He is changing your inner state, cleansing your heart and mind so that you can perceive and fulfill His will more fully. Such changes may come with inner conflict, as old habits and desires try to hold on, but the power of God overcomes all obstacles. As you go through this process, it is essential to maintain faith and trust in God's plan. Let every step, every decision, and every change be filled with the awareness that you are becoming more prepared to fulfill the great mission destined for you from above. When a believer begins to face persecution, rejection, or condemnation from others, it can be a clear sign that they are in the process of spiritual pruning. These trials may be unexpected and painful, but they play a crucial role in God's plan for our spiritual growth. Persecution and rejection can manifest in various forms. Sometimes it is expressed in the misunderstanding from those close to you who do not share your spiritual aspirations. You may be criticized for your beliefs or for placing God's values above worldly ones. This can cause feelings of isolation and loneliness, but remember that such moments are not accidental, but part of a greater plan. Jesus told His disciples, "If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you." John 15:18. These words remind us that following Christ inevitably leads to conflicts with the world. Persecution and rejection are not punishments, but signs that you are on the right path. They help us break free from the dependency on human opinions and strengthen our faith and reliance on God. These trials, however painful they may be, serve an important purpose. They cleanse us of pride, teach us humility, and make us more like Christ. In moments of rejection and persecution, we draw closer to God, seeking comfort and support from Him rather than from the world. This allows our spiritual growth to occur more deeply and meaningfully. It is crucial to remember that God never abandons us in these difficult times. He uses them to guide us toward greater maturity and to prepare us for the tasks He has set before us. So, when facing persecution and rejection, view them as part of the divine pruning process that leads to your spiritual transformation and fortification. When good fruits begin to manifest in your life, it is one of the most evident signs that the pruning process has borne its results. These fruits can include spiritual growth, character transformation, and strengthened faith. It is essential to understand that pruning, though painful, is a necessary step toward these positive changes. Spiritual growth often reveals itself in a deepened understanding of your faith and more solid relationships with God. You may notice that you have become more tolerant, humble, and compassionate. Your prayers become more sincere and filled with gratitude rather than merely requests for help. Your faith strengthens, and you begin to see God's hand in all aspects of your life, even in the most challenging moments. Character transformation is another fruit of pruning. You may notice that you are less prone to irritation, anger, or fear. Instead, qualities that God values begin to emerge: peace, joy, kindness, faith, gentleness, and self-control. These changes make you more Christ-like, and people around you start to notice these transformations, even if you do not realize it yourself. Strengthening of faith is also a crucial aspect of pruning. As you go through difficulties and trials, you learn to rely on God in everything. Faith becomes not just an abstract concept, but a living and active element of your life. You begin to trust God not only in words, but also in deeds, leading to profound changes in your inner world. The pruning process is never easy, but the results are worth it. The good fruits you start to see in your life are signs that God is working in and through you. These fruits not only strengthen your faith and character, but also serve as an example to others, inspiring them to pursue spiritual growth and transformation. Remember that every fruit you see is part of God's plan for your spiritual perfection and preparation for great works. Pruning and the process of trimming are central elements of the spiritual journey, aimed at developing the fruits of the Spirit and becoming more like Christ. In this process, God removes everything from our lives that hinders our growth and fruitfulness. This may involve letting go of old habits, toxic relationships, or deeply ingrained beliefs that no longer serve our spiritual purpose. Pruning is not merely about removing the unnecessary, it is an act of divine care, where each cut opens the way for new growth. As we go through this process, our inner world transforms. We become more patient, loving, peaceful, and kind, qualities that reflect the character of Christ. This process can be painful and challenging, but its results are undeniable and significant. In Matthew 10:16-22, Jesus warns his disciples that they will face persecution, condemnation, and misunderstanding. "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. But beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils and scourge you in their synagogues." These words remind us that pruning inevitably involves confrontations with the world. These trials are used by God to cleanse us and make us stronger in faith. As we go through these trials, we learn to rely on God, not on our strength. We learn to forgive and love those who persecute us, which is one of the most powerful testimonies of becoming like Christ. This process not only makes us stronger, but also more like our Savior. In every moment of pain and difficulty, God is at work in us, shaping the character of Christ and preparing us for His great purposes. Pruning and the process of trimming are paths to spiritual maturity and fruitfulness. It is an integral part of our spiritual journey that, despite its complexity, brings deep satisfaction and joy from realizing that we are getting closer to God's plan for our lives. Radical dependence on God's providence is a crucial aspect of a believer's life, requiring complete trust and confidence that God will support us in any circumstances. This state of being acknowledges our total reliance on His wisdom, power, and love. It is important to understand that such dependence is not a weakness, but rather the source of true strength and spiritual freedom. The disciples of Jesus faced many trials and difficulties that required complete dedication to God's ways. In Matthew 10:9-10, Jesus tells them, "Do not take gold or silver or copper in your belts. No bag for the journey or extra shirt or sandals or a staff, for the worker is worth his keep." These words emphasize the need for radical dependence on God, where believers must rely solely on His providence, not on material resources. Such trust allows us to see God's intervention and care in our lives more clearly. When we relinquish the attempt to control every aspect of our lives and give this power to God, we open the way for His miraculous intervention. This can manifest in unexpected blessings, help in difficult situations, and inner peace that surpasses all understanding. Radical dependence also teaches us humility and patience. We learn to wait for God's timing, relying on His wisdom and plans. This strengthens our faith and makes us more receptive to His will. In moments when hope seems to fade, this deep trust in God's providence gives us the strength to continue and see light, even in the darkest circumstances. The disciples of Jesus must be ready for this level of dependence to see more of God in their lives. It is a path to deep spiritual growth and maturity, requiring courage and determination, but bringing incomparable blessings and the joy of knowing that God is always with us. Jesus gave His disciples clear instructions on how to conduct themselves during the pruning process, so they could be prepared for trials and rely fully on God's support. In Matthew 10:9-13, He says, "Do not get any gold or silver or copper to take with you in your belts, no bag for the journey or extra shirt or sandals or a staff, for the worker is worth his keep. Whatever town or village you enter, search there for some worthy person and stay at their house until you leave." These words from Jesus are aimed at teaching the disciples to trust completely in God's providence and care. He instructs them that during the pruning process, they do not need material resources or extra provisions. Instead, they should rely on God and trust that He will provide for all their needs. This mindset requires deep faith and humility from the disciples. These instructions also imply that the disciples must be prepared for the difficulties and trials that inevitably come during the pruning process. Forsaking material comforts and depending entirely on God's support is a powerful testimony of faith and obedience. It teaches us that true strength and security come not from external resources, but from an inner connection with God. During the pruning process, the disciples must also seek and find those who are worthy to receive them and support their mission. This emphasizes the importance of spiritual community and mutual aid among believers. The faith and support of other community members can become a vital resource in difficult times. Jesus also points out the importance of staying in a particular place until the mission is complete. This teaches us patience and perseverance, the ability to wait and trust in God's timing. It is important not to rush or try to avoid difficulties, but to go through them with the assurance that God is guiding and supporting us. These instructions from Jesus help the disciples and us today to understand the importance of fully trusting in God and His providence during the pruning process. They remind us that despite the difficulties and trials, God is always with us, and His care never leaves us. The pruning process plays a crucial role in developing the fruits of the Holy Spirit, such as love, joy, peace, and patience. This spiritual journey helps believers become more like Christ, purifying their hearts and minds from everything unnecessary and superfluous. When God leads us through pruning, we encounter trials that compel us to seek comfort and guidance from Him. These moments of difficulty and change help cultivate deep and sincere love, not just for God, but also for our neighbors. The love that arises in a heart cleansed of selfishness and pride becomes the foundation for all other fruits of the Spirit. Joy is another fruit that develops through pruning. This joy does not depend on external circumstances, It stems from the inner conviction that we are in God's hands and that His plan for us is perfect. In moments when everything seems lost, it is this joy that fills our hearts and gives us the strength to keep moving forward. The peace that comes from God surpasses all understanding. In the pruning process, we learn to trust Him even in the most challenging situations. This peace fills our souls, allowing us to remain calm and confident regardless of the storms raging around us. We learn to see God's hand in every situation and find rest in His presence. Patience is perhaps one of the most challenging fruits of the Spirit to develop through pruning. We learn to wait for God's timing, even when we desire quick fixes and changes. Through this process, we become more humble and resilient, understanding that every moment has its purpose and significance. Pruning is not just a process of purification, but a path to deep spiritual transformation. With each trial, with each difficult moment, we draw closer to the image of Christ, who is our ideal and goal. The development of the fruits of the Spirit is a continuous journey that requires us to be open to change and trust in God's plan. In the process of spiritual pruning, accepting difficulties and trials plays a crucial role. Often we encounter situations that seem unbearable and unfair to us. However, it is precisely in such moments that the deepest work of God takes place in our hearts. The hardships we endure are an integral part of the pruning process, aimed at our spiritual purification and growth. When we face trials, it is important to understand that these moments are not random. They are meticulously planned by God to strengthen our faith and prepare us for greater service. Just as a gardener prunes a tree to produce more fruit, God removes everything from our lives that hinders our spiritual development. This process may be painful, but its fruits are incomparably valuable. Accepting difficulties as part of pruning requires deep trust in God. We must believe that every hardship we encounter is part of His great plan for us. In John 15:2, it says, "He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, He prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful." These words remind us that trials and difficulties are necessary for our spiritual growth. The pruning process teaches us patience and humility. In moments of trials, we learn to rely not on our strength, but on God's wisdom and power. We become more resilient and ready for the great tasks that God has planned for us. This is a time of deep inner transformation when our faith becomes stronger and our spirit more robust. When we accept difficulties as part of pruning, we open ourselves to new opportunities and blessings. We learn to see every trial as an opportunity for spiritual growth and drawing closer to God. This process prepares us for greater service and makes us more mature and ready to fulfill God's will in our lives. Prayer takes a central place in the process of spiritual pruning. It allows us to humbly turn to God, asking for forgiveness for our mistakes and promising to submit to His will. In these moments of prayer, we acknowledge our weakness and dependence on God's strength and mercy. Prayer helps us open our hearts to accept all the changes that God has prepared for us. Start your prayer with sincere repentance. Acknowledge your mistakes and shortcomings. Ask God for forgiveness. These are not just words, but a deep awareness of your faults and sins. Lord, forgive me for all my mistakes and sins. Cleanse my heart and help me become better, stronger, and closer to you. The next step is to promise to submit to the pruning process. Pruning is not always a pleasant process, and it is often accompanied by pain and discomfort. But it is in these moments that we must trust God, knowing that all this is necessary for our spiritual growth. Lord, I promise to submit to your will and go through all the trials you have prepared for me. I believe that this will lead me to spiritual growth and prepare me for your great plans. Asking for mercy is also important. We must be ready to ask God for mercy and grace to go through the pruning process. Lord, grant me mercy and grace so that I can go through this pruning process. Give me the strength and patience to endure all the difficulties and trials. Finally, express your readiness to do whatever God commands. This shows your complete trust and dedication to God's plans. Lord, I am ready to do whatever you command. Lead me, guide my steps, and help me be prepared to fulfill your plans. This Prayer not only strengthens your connection with God, but also prepares you to go through the pruning process with faith and humility. It helps you realize that all the difficulties and trials are part of God's plan, which will lead you to greater spiritual growth and maturity. The pruning process, though painful, leads to spiritual growth and maturity. Embracing difficulties, prayer, and complete trust in God help us draw closer to Him and prepare for great deeds. Remember, each trial is a step towards deeper spiritual transformation.